Did everybody get the coffee and break that they needed? Let us hope. If you haven't tried the Trilogy iced coffee and you're at all iced coffee people, I got to tell you, take it from me. I probably do 60 ounces a day. Just to keep it level. So I love all the conversation, but stop it. So one of the things that we're getting ready to address in this session is sort of what Pete calls the technology. How does this stuff make its way into practice? And he talked about sort of his typical spiel being this invitation of ambiguity and unknowing and uncertainty. And so I mentioned Mike the Prophet. This is Mike Furlong. His band is Mike the Prophet. They're going to be here, full band tonight. Really, really want you guys to come back. I figured we could kind of kill two birds with one stone. We want to give you a little taste of what to expect tonight. It'll be amped up on a full band, which is phenomenal. They've been rehearsing in here this week. It's going to be great. But I specifically asked Mike to, at the last moment, mind you, I asked him to jump in and play a song for us because I think it really illustrates what it is that Peter's talking about. So he's going to play a song that he wrote called When I'm Dead. And the chorus of it is, I don't know what will happen when I'm dead. And so sort of as Pete's been talking about, rather than sort of coming into a sacred space or liturgical space and feeling the pressure to declare either a belief or a lack of belief in sort of propositions about the afterlife, this is a really healthy way of saying maybe a lot of times the thing that we need to bring to the surface, right? He keeps doing this. What needs to come to the surface? The truth is that really we don't know. And that makes people with certainty addictions really, really uncomfortable. But I think this might represent the kind of song that functions well in communities like this. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Furlong, Mike the Prophet.
Let's give it up for Robbie Corelli on the board. Let's maybe bring it, there it is, the aw shucks grin. It's called When I'm Dead. Well, I sure hope what I can is as beautiful as what I leave behind. I know it's not there for me to find, but I hope for only tears for those alive. I hope my brother will be proud of me. And if I have kids, I wish them well. I hope I leave a worthy legacy. 'Cause I don't know what'll happen when I'm dead.
Once again, Mike the Prophet, going to have a full band here tonight. If you got friends in the area, they don't need to pay for like the weekend or anything. If they just want to come out, check out some music, we'll have some drinks for sale, beer and wine. Come check it out. In the meantime, Peter Rollins.
Don't encourage me, honestly. I'll never stop. Okay, we made it this far. Okay, we've got a new thing, which sounds even worse than the old one.
But it's new, though.
But it's new, yeah. Ooh. You see, this is what I said about earlier, you know, the church dresses in its Sunday best. This is actually part of it. We've set this all up to kind of, as a metaphor for our lives, not really quite working out the way we'd like them to. Is that?
Yeah, it's close. We just don't want it right in front of your mouth because it'll catch your breath.
Yeah, nobody wants that. Yeah, okay. So last session, you're all here because now you get the answer. Okay, the secret is revealed. And of course, we've got tonight, and tonight is probably the most important bit because it's the chance for us to kind of live this stuff out. If we're talking about how to do community well, then coming together and having a drink and chatting and enjoying good music is part of that. A metaphor that I think I used last night about the sports bar where you might go and get drunk and loud music and forget your troubles is one way of dealing with things, but ultimately your troubles come back. You get drunk on a Saturday night and a Sunday morning, you got the hangover and you still got to face the problems. And some people use church in that way. Sunday morning you go get drunk and all of the music and the big sermons, but the stuff comes back in the Monday hangover and you got to go back. But alternatively, you got a place where you come for a drink and you listen to music that actually helps you connect with some parts of yourself. And in that process, you talk about the good things in your life and the difficult things and the problems in your marriage, the lack of sleep because of your kids or whatever. And in that process, you kind of feel better. And it's not depressing, it's a social thing. It's an environment of fun, but somehow in the midst of that, it's also got some sort of real practical value. So that's kind of a metaphor for the type of church community that kind of I'm trying to talk about. And, a lot of this is about saying, okay, idealization is problematic. Idealization is where you have something that you think is going to be wonderful and great and make everything fantastic. And you go, okay, idealization is a problem. So what's the alternative? We just go, oh, life's a bit rubbish, and that's it, that's a bit depressing. But no, the opposite isn't just like seeing that there's gaps in everything, seeing the end in every beginning, seeing the decay in every newborn child or something like that. The alternative can be called sublimation. And sublimation is a strange thing where actually you find depth and density of meaning in the imperfect and in the broken. Mitchell and Webb again, they had a great best man speech thing. I mean, it's been done multiple times before, the funny best man speech, but they have a particularly good one where the just says, he says, I just want to toast my wife, the most beautiful woman in the world. And everyone, cheers, cheers, cheers. And then he sits down, and the best man gets up to start, but he's looking very confused. And he's like, the most beautiful woman in the world? I mean, like, seriously, right? Really? And then a few people go, oh, and he's like, oh, no, I mean, she looks fine, but, she's not the most beautiful woman in the world. And then he's like, what? And he's like, seriously, do you think that she's the most beautiful woman in the world? I mean, the paparazzi would be here if she was the most beautiful woman in the world. We wouldn't be drinking Prosecco. We'd be drinking champagne. And somebody says, you're not so hot yourself. He's like, I'm not saying I'm handsome. I'm just saying she isn't the most. She scrubs up pretty well, but like Audrey Hepburn, she isn't, right? And this kind of goes back. Sad, and he's going like, I was going to tell a humorous story about when the groom ran naked through a hotel room, but I'm worried that I'm going to make people commit suicide who think that this is Olympus and that we are witnessing a marriage of the gods, And then he sits down. He's like, was that okay? Yeah, it was fine. But it's the same. If some parents say, "Oh, our child's the most beautiful child in the world," right? You don't go, "No, they're not." They've got big ears. Those ears are not natural. I mean, they are, in some cultures, he'd probably be worshipped as a god, but I think, in this culture, plastic surgery is what's required, right? You don't do that. You understand that, but the parents don't go, oh, our child is above average looks and below average intelligence. You don't do that. You're not trying to be objective. The parent says, my child is the most beautiful child in the world, and they literally mean it. But they also don't. The literalist, the fundamentalist would be the person you go oh, my child's the most beautiful child in the world. And I go, oh, yeah, your child is very beautiful. And they're like, no, my child is objectively the most beautiful child in the world. Worship my child. That would be kind of like the literalistic reading of that. And by the way, idealization happens a lot with parents. I know people who are teachers. And, there's often problems whenever their little Johnny, their angelic little Johnny, gets in trouble. And some parents can't handle that. Our little Johnny would never do that. Our little Johnny would never cheat or would never hit the person beside them. And there's a sense in which the parents have idealized their kid. And that's usually a defense. That's usually something that's not great, maybe in the relationship, and they're living out this fantasy in their child, and it's terrible for the child as well. But mostly, a healthy way of having a child is sublimation, where somehow in the imperfections, there's perfection, there's beauty in the strife and the struggle. That's sublimation, where the imperfect somehow radiates the perfect and the beautiful, but without you thinking that it's perfect. So if you treat someone idealistically in a relationship, you can't think of them as imperfect in any way. You put them on a pedestal, and ultimately things can go very, very wrong. But somehow sublimation is where you love somebody precisely because of the things that kind of, they're forgetful, or they do this or that, or those things are actually part of what draws your desire. And so in the same way, to get rid of the idea that we need perfection and we need something that's unchanging and gives us wholeness, is not then some sort of nihilistic dark hole where we just listen to goth music and wear black. We can do that as well, but it's where you can celebrate life in its complexity and in its imperfections, where you can strangely go, yeah, this community is the best community in the world. This is brilliant. Yet strangely not mean by that it's literally the best objective community in the world. And so in practice, in this kind of last little session together, what does that look like? And I want to just talk about some things that I've explored in my community back in Belfast when I was. And I don't think these will necessarily be of use to other people, but the ideas might spark off other ideas. So something you might go, oh, you know what, that would be useful. Or you'll get a feel for something else, and you'll get an idea for something that you could try in your own place. But, for me, I've been trying to develop what I call decentering practices. And I kind of play on decentering practices because we often talk about centering practices, and centering practices are nice and good. But I say that in such a way that I don't believe it, don't I? Yeah, they're nice and good. Yeah, but I do think that actually decentering is often where the change happens in our lives. And I think of science. I think of like the Copernican revolution was a decentering. So it's a very traumatic thing. We find out we're not the center of the solar system and the universe, and and that was threats, a huge threat. But it also opened up a whole new way of thinking and new science, new technologies. Another decentering was Darwin, that kind of like decenters that the human is somehow like the pinnacle and above the animal. We're decentered and put into the animal kingdom. And then the Freudian insight, is a decentering that, the ego isn't the center of the subject, that we're actually have motives and desires and interests that we're often not even aware of. And that's a decentering. But each of these processes have great gifts, even though they're very traumatic for us. So decentering practices are kind of spiritual practices that do something similar. The first one I developed was very, very simple. It was called the Last Supper. And it was where 12 of us would get together in an upper room. We would have food and wine, and we would invite a guest who would probably have different beliefs or practices to most of the people or all of the people in the room. And over the starter, we would ask them to tell us what you believe. Give us your speech. What are you about? And then during the main course, maybe some more Q&A. And in dessert, we would kind of have a broader discussion. And it was called the Last Supper because if we didn't like what they said, it was their last supper, right? And also we put them in the seat of Christ. So kind of symbolically, they were like the bringer of truth, and you know what we did with him, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to put you in this seat of truth, and we're going to listen to you and be careful. It's like it reminds me of what happened between Napoleon and the Pope, supposedly. Napoleon was no fear of the Pope, and he wanted to do away with religion. And he was supposed to bow before the Pope and receive a crown, I think it was. And Napoleon just takes it. He doesn't bow down. And the Pope leans into him and says, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to destroy Christianity, but you'll never succeed. He says, we've been trying for thousands of years. Yeah. So we're going to, we're going to put you, know what we did with Christ, but we'll put you in the center. And the idea of that was, in the community that I grew up in, we didn't really encounter the other, except in very safe ways. We would maybe read a book about some thinker that's not kosher, right? But we wouldn't read that thinker directly. We'd read the critique, right? So we only encountered the other in very, very specific modes. And so we were very naive. We would say very silly things. Like in some groups you can hear somebody say, if you're an atheist, you can't be moral. There's no morality in atheism or whatever. If there was one atheist in the room, he could just to go, hold on a second, that's a bit ridiculous, right? It would have broken it, but you weren't encountering the other in any kind of way. So the Last Supper was a very non-defensive way to bring someone in and over a meal, playfully, because it's called the Last Supper, listen to somebody, realize that they're not as weird as they seem and have a bit of disagreement, but ultimately encounter that person who is the other. Now, one of those is just an interesting evening, but to do 12 of those over the course of a year gradually gets you to start to rethink things. You don't have to do it. No one teaches it. Just the very act of doing it as a spiritual discipline, a decentering practice, can begin to what would be the word? Just begin to shake something loose. Just to begin to open something up. Make you start to look at yourself in a different way. Because when you encounter someone who is other to you, there's different beliefs and practices, the first thing we do, and most of us have probably been in communities that have tried to consume otherness, where the desire is to make the other into us, to take their distinct beliefs and practices and kind of integrate them into our social body. Right? Then, very closely connected with that, the other side of that coin is if you can't do that, then you have to vomit the other out, get rid of them, push them away. If you can't integrate the other, then the other has to be in some way expelled from the social body. And you think of it like a child who puts something in her mouth, and if it tastes good, she can swallow it and it becomes part of her body, or she spits it out, right? If it's dangerous, it does come, he spits it out. The other next thing we do is often toleration is kind of like the next step. We go like, as long as you don't talk about your beliefs and practices, we can hang out. You're weird, fair enough. Whatever you do behind closed doors is fine, but don't talk about it, right? And then we can work together. And that's how, society, secular society often works. We can work alongside each other, just keep it all quiet. And then another form is dialogue. In kind of the liberal tradition, often it's going like, what, beneath all of our differences, we're pretty much the same. We all value the same things, beneath the different streams, there's an ocean of sameness. And let's just connect with that, this oceanic thing that we share. But in all of those, I'm right. In the first three, I'm right and you're wrong. And in the last, hey, we're both right, everything's great, let's have tea and biscuits, right? I retain correctness. What's most disturbing about the other is that at first I look at them and think they're monstrous and weird. But then I look at myself through their eyes and I realize that I'm monstrous and weird. That's what's truly terrifying often about the other, is not that they're other, it's that they expose my otherness to myself, my weirdness. And so in the Last Supper, in a very simple way, over 12 weeks, 12 events in a year, you start to go, oh yeah, I'm a bit weird. Our beliefs and practices are a bit bizarre, aren't they? And in a very subtle way, you start to see things about yourself that you wouldn't have seen before. You need the other person's eyes in order to see yourself. And that led us to develop another decentering practice, which was called the Evangelism Project. And the Evangelism Project was simply where a group of us would once a month go to visit a different community in Belfast and kind of ask them to evangelize us. So, we go from Scientology to Hare Krishna to Humanist Society, whatever it was, you go there and it was a chance to go, right, what do you believe? Come on, convince us. But the evangelism didn't happen in that moment. That wasn't why it was called the Evangelism Project. Because you know what? Who's going to be converted in one meeting, to something? There'd be something wrong with you if you did. Whatever it is, that would be weird. It might happen, and that's okay. But mostly, it's unlikely. The evangelism happened whenever we said, "What do we look like to you?" Is this Christian community in Belfast, and when meeting the Islamic Society, for example, what do Christians look like to you in Belfast? And then you can begin to have a conversation where you learn what to see yourself through the other person's eyes, and you see things about yourself that you hadn't seen before. And you go, oh my goodness. And so you're being evangelized because you're being challenged to become better at your own tradition, to be a better Christian, to see the blind spots that you couldn't otherwise see without the other. And again, doing one of these is just an interesting experiment. But over the course of a year, if you commit to doing a number of these, it can again have quite a rupturing and positive experience, bringing up the repressed, the things that are there but you're not looking at, begin to bring them to the surface and see how you might be part of a system, part of it, I don't know, Christians in the land or whatever. There might be things that you just didn't see, but engaging in the humanist side or whatever, you're able to address. And then that led to another decentering practice. And that was, which was the next one? Oh, Atheism for Lent. And Atheism for Lent is one of my favorites. I really enjoyed it. I mean, at first it was basically going, okay, Lent is about giving stuff up. Right? What can we give up? All right, let's give up God. Right? There you go. There's the ultimate Lenten experience, to give up the divine, give up meaning, give up church, give up all of that. And of course, it's a playful thing. But actually, what we did is we said, right, over Lent, we are going to read the great critiques of religion, the great critiques about God and faith, not to judge them, but to let them judge us. seems like a good idea. If we're coming up to the cross, Easter, when God says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Brilliant. Let's read the great critiques. And once a week get together and talk about how they challenged us and what they did for us. And we kind of developed it. So the first time we did it, we just used a book by Merrill Westphal, a good philosopher, a kind of Christian philosopher, but called Suspicion and Faith, and it's a good book. But, that was still us reading the critiques through, someone who was kind of one of us. And so the Atheism for Lent course developed into reading the direct materials. And then it's continued to develop, and I'm going to try and create a program, if only I had the organizational skills, but to kind of to involve films, documentaries on YouTube. So every day you're reading something. It might be a comedian, it might be Nietzsche, it might be Marx, it might be Dawkins, whatever. But you have these 40 little reflections, and maybe one day, as I say, it's a 5-minute video on YouTube. On Friday night, it's watching The Invention of Lying or something like that. And what's key in something like Atheism for Lent is not to tell people where they're going to land, right? Because people will want to know that, and if I do this, will I lose my faith? Or, will I question everything? Will I lose everything? It's very tempting to be the facilitator who says, it'll be okay. You'll get through this. The other end, it'll be fine. I have no idea. I don't know if they'll be fine. I don't know what they'll have or what they won't have. And I don't want to give them the false promise, because then I stop them from taking journey. If I say it's all going to be okay, then, in some senses, it's like a false type of danger. We're strapping ourselves into the roller coaster, having the experience of danger, but don't worry, it'll all be okay in the end. The old thing of, you can have doubts, because God can contain those doubts. God can cope with your doubts. That's the how far the evangelical church can go by still maintaining meta belief, because that's not doubt at all. That's a dark night of the soul with a nightlight switched on, right? You can have doubts because God can contain them. There's meta belief over the doubt. The doubt's there, and then the meta belief is because God can handle it, right? The real doubt is going, I don't know if there is a safety net. I'm just in that dark place. There is no nightlight here to save me. But the secret is in this, because we're not actually doing it, is, Atheism for Lent, in my experience, people have gone through that and felt self-reflected that they have a deeper faith. Some people maybe have left church, some people come back to it. There's one person was a missionary, and he did the Atheism for Lent. He just basically was giving up on the whole thing. He'd been a missionary in, I think it was Kazakhstan, for 10 years, and he was just done. And he did Atheism for Lent, and he was like, I shouldn't have done that. Now I want to stay in church. I thought I was going to leave, But the reason was because he had all those questions. He had all that stuff. It was down there, deep down, eating away at him. But Atheism for Lent allowed him the chance to kind of actually bring all that to the surface, to talk about it, to wrestle it through. And then when he did, he realized, that didn't take me away from my faith. In some respects, I feel as much a part of it as ever, but now I don't have all of this stuff that I'm angry and bitter about. I've somehow been able to bring it to the surface. And this is, again, like sublimation. It's I don't have to have total belief or anything like that. And you think of it like marriage. Again, people use marriage and think of it as something that's wonderful and great and will satisfy your life. I have a friend who just wrote a book on relationships, and I wanted them to start don't work. That was mine. To start with, relationships don't work, right? But in the same way that Winston Churchill says, democracy's rubbish until you compare it with the alternatives. Relationships don't work, but maybe they don't work better than the alternatives, right? And so it's maybe a better type of not working. And so so don't worry, get that burden off your back. Realize that the other person's an idiot, and so are you, and kind of let's look at some ways to kind of work with that, right? But in a sense, marriage is a terrible thing, and engagement and asking someone to marry you is a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. It's like you know what you're like. And you would put yourself on someone else for the rest of their life. Someone you love, not even somebody you like, somebody you love. You would say, you're stuck with me for the rest of your life. I mean, that's a cruel and torturous thing to do. It's an evil thing to do. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I mean, like, you want that person to be happy, you know, not deal with your problems all their life, right? And not only that, it's like, it's probably not going to work, right? You know, the statistics are really bad, and you think you're going to be the lucky one for whom it does work. Oh, yeah. No, of course you're not. It's probably not going to work. I know you. You're terrible, and so are they, right? And you know, so, you know, if there's not affairs and all of that, it's going to be even worse. You're going to silently resent each other and sleep into separate rooms, right? That's it. That's what you've got coming, right? I don't know if are you going out with each other? You're not? Oh, I thought you cuddled in there for a second. Yeah. I think it's in your future. This is a prophecy. I think, yeah. Split up with whoever you're out with and go.
Are you prophesying over?
I am indeed.
Right.
I feel that. Yeah. It's a little gift. I used to do that kind of stuff, actually. I was very good at it. Those days are behind me. There's somebody here with a sore back? Or knows somebody with a sore back? Somebody has a problem with masturbation. Come on. Yeah. No, sorry. Forget it. Yeah. Someone's laughing too hard. Who was that? Oh, yeah. You know, it's probably going to be awful. Yeah. And the thing is about that is, like, if I talk to you about that and go like, why are you getting married? It's probably not going to work, and you don't even, you know, it's awful. And you go, oh yeah, you're right. My goodness, look at the stats. This is probably going to be really bad. Yeah, I won't bother. Like, well, that showed you something, right? That's good. But if at the end of it you go, I don't care. Yeah, you're right, absolutely. But still, bring it on. You know, I love this person. Want to marry them. You know, that's love, right? It's like, yeah. And in fact, I've come from the future, and I've got a DVD. What's a DVD? It's a strange kind of future that's gone. And I've got a VHS. Yeah. Don't ask. Things really went wrong in about 5 years' time. Yeah, Betamax. I've got this Betamax but it shows exactly whenever you guys break up and use the kids against each other, and where you kind of hate each other and resent each other, and there it is. Well, the person who really loves is like, yeah, I don't care. Throw it away. I'm going to do it anyway. Bring it on. I'm in love with this person. So what you find is, in sublimation, you don't need the guarantee of perfection and rightness and everything's great. You don't need it at all. In fact, you can have the opposite. It doesn't matter. You're like, I just want this. This is like in me more than myself. You cut me and I bleed you. And let's do it. Let's have this adventure and see where it goes. Let the chips fall where they may. Life is risk. Let's do it, right? That's love. And so you do atheism for Lent, and the person goes, I don't know if I believe any of this stuff anymore. I don't know. I think this is a brilliant argument, and I think I've used God as a crutch, and oh, wow, I feel like maybe everything's meaningless. But wow, you know, I'm still a part of this community, and I feel as much taken up in this as ever. And maybe I don't know what it means to have faith in Christ, but I still know what it means to have the faith of Christ. To want to live in that way, to bring things to the surface, to be more human. And so the atheism for Lent kind of can clear the clutter. So that can often happen, but I don't want to guarantee anything. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to, like, if you want to do this journey, let's do it. If you want to read these thinkers and really critically engage, I think it'll be good. But I don't even know where I'm going to be at the end of this. So I can't guarantee where you will be. And that's atheism for Lent. And then the final decentering practices that I developed before moving to America was the Omega course, which I mentioned earlier. The Omega course was, you know, the play on the Alpha course, where it's like 12 weeks to exit Christianity. And it was really kind of 12 weeks to exit toxic religion. But you wouldn't believe how many ministers and worship leaders and church leaders wanted to do the Omega course. I mean, that was the most popular thing I probably did. And we did pretty much what the Alpha course did. We looked at the various things, historical Jesus, we looked at kind of the Bible, you know, all of these kind of things. But we showed that actually some of the greatest conversations and critiques and discussions are actually within Christianity. If atheism for Lent was about critique from outside of Christianity, then the Omega course was about saying, and these critiques have been from within as well. And there's a questioning that's part of it, and there's this constant wrestling with and transforming of the tradition. Not like the trickster move of just, there's a lot of trickster stuff, but also, the jester move. The jester move of just asking questions within an acceptable frame. But there's lots of tricksters in Christianity. People who have really fundamentally asked, Radical questions that have transformed the very nature of what Christianity looks like. And introducing people to that fascinating conversation and allowing it to be. Because at the very point when you start to ask those questions, it's often the very moment that you're asked to leave a church. Right? The very moment you say, I don't know if I believe in God, or I don't know what I believe about the Bible or whatever. That's the exit strategy. You open your mouth on that and you're gone, okay? But actually, that's probably the very point when you should be welcomed in. It's like, oh, you've got all the answers now. You go off and do your thing. You're fine. We're a bunch of people who don't know what we're doing. Come on in. The water's lukewarm. Come on. The Jewish tradition is very much like that. There's lots of parables. One of the old parables that I used to use, if I can remember it, but it's about an old rabbi. And this young guy comes to the old rabbi and says, teach me the wisdom of the Hebrew people. And the old man looks at him. He says, what age are you? The guy says, I'm 25. He says, 25? Go away. Come back in 10 years' time. What age are you? What do you think? And he says, listen, I've studied philosophy. I know Aristotelian logic, symbolic logic. I'm ready, right? And the rabbi says, okay, I'll test you. See how you do. He says, two people come down a chimney, and at the bottom one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Tell me, who washes their face? And the young guy says, the person with the soot in their face. And the old rabbi says, no, don't be stupid. The one without the soot on their face, because they see that the soot's on the other person's face, and therefore they go, I must have soot on my face, and they wash their face, right? They mirror, right? And they go, yeah, very good, very good. I said, no, come on, give me another test. I'll think harder next time. And the rabbi says, okay, I'll ask you a different question. It says, two people come down a chimney, and at the bottom one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Who washes their face? And the young guy goes, the guy without the soot in his face, because he sees the guy, and the rabbi stops him and says, don't try and be smart. So the guy with the soot in his face, he tastes it in his mouth, he feels it in his eyes, he just washes his face. Don't be stupid, right? And the guy, what? And he says, go away, just go away, come back in 10 years. He says, try me one more time. And he goes, okay, I will ask you a different question. Two guys come down a chimney, and at the bottom, one has soot in their face and one doesn't. Who washes their face? The young guy says, was it my first answer for different reasons? And the rabbi says, no. He says, they both wash their face. You don't come down a chimney and not think you've got soot on your face. Don't be so stupid. Come back in 10 years, right? Now, the interesting thing about the parable is, I think it's exactly, I'm exactly like the young guy, or I have been. I want the singular answer. Right? And I think the rabbi is trying to say, no. Get into a conversation, get into an argument. With me, fight it. This is it. If you think there's a single answer to this, go away, you're too young. If you're ready to engage in this dialogue and critique and argument, then come on in. Right? That's the very point when you kind of start. And the Omega course was an attempt to kind of mimic that and show that. And just like a child, often the church can be a place where belief comes first. Do you believe that Jesus died for your sins? And if you go, yes, then you behave and you engage in a ritual, you pray, you repent, and then belong. You enter into the community. But within the Jewish tradition, it's more like a child. A child belongs is before there's any belief or behavior. And then behavior comes second, the rituals of the family life, going for walks on a Sunday and having dinner together in the evening, whatever. And finally, belief comes, and at first it's the same as the parents, and then it's diametrically opposed in adolescence, and then finally, it's some sort of equilibrium of some agreement, some disagreement, but all cradled in a shared sense of belonging, in a shared kind of sense of family. So the Omega course is an attempt to not teach that. Again, these are disciplines. This is the technology, not the theory. It's not to teach it, it's to live it. It's to provide a context where it's just happening and where people naturally start to glimpse a different type of Christian life, one that's not about believing a certain set of things. Now, the reason why that was so central to what I was doing is because that kind of belief was so important in the church communities that I was a part of. And I think that's the same in a lot of American churches. But there are also other issues. And so those spiritual disciplines might not be the useful ones for you. But there was also what we did with Icon proper, and we called that Transformance art. And I'm only going to mention a couple of the gatherings. Everyone was different. This was not so much a church. It was more like a performance space where once a month we came together in a bar, this dingy bar in Belfast, and we created a kind of like an immersive performance art thing. Technical term thing. And we called it Transformance art, and every month was a little bit different. But it was designed to shock, and it was designed to offend. It was equal opportunities offender, so as not to offend anybody. We tried to offend everybody, right? So that was good. So if the Conservatives were offended one month, we offended Liberals the next month. We were all trying to offend everybody so that we all felt good, right? And to shake something and to decenter us. But again, we were trying to find ways of, in subtle ways, bring up to the surface what we were repressing. It started off very simply that I didn't know what I was doing. I just was in this bar that I liked, and I was having a drink with my French tutor at the time, and I was telling her, I was like, I would love to do something, that was just in this bar, something spiritual, I don't know, whatever. And open, don't close the bar, we just do it around people. And she was like, you should ask Francie. Francie was the barman at the time. Francie was a tough guy, like he was tall, even for an Irish guy, he was like big. And actually the bar was it was a Republican bar. There was an IRA arms find in it a few years later. I went up to Francie and said, I would like to do something in your bar, something like to do with faith. And he was like, he actually said something like Pat Buckley. I think it was Pat Buckley, he said, who was this like rogue Catholic priest. And I went, yeah, something like that. And he was like, okay. He says, you're on in 3 weeks. Just wrote me in the book. I'm like, oh, okay. And so people say, give me a manual of how to start something. I'm going to okay, first thing is kind of get a bit drunk in an Irish bar, and then ask the barman to do something. Right, there you go. That's the first step, right? There's step one. That's how most things happen in Ireland. And so we started Icon. But, at first, really, the only thing was to go, okay, let's have a space where people can talk about the difficulties. And because there were quite a few people in the church I used to go to that were struggling in relationships that were difficult or with their beliefs, we created a space where they could just bring that to the surface. That was it. But then we began to develop from there. But, one of our gatherings was called Sins of the Father. And we did one version of this at midnight. And you came into the bar, and there was just hundreds of broken wine glasses littered around the room. And there was these words, when I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? And as people got drinks, this was just over the DJ, these words were echoing around the room. And then someone got up and started the night and said, at the end of days, all humanity will stand before the throne. And the book of life will be opened up. And humanity will look to see if God's name is written. And in one voice they will say, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? And that night then, we just invited people to write down the times where God had sinned against them. And we had little scraps of paper littered around, and people wrote things, and if they weren't X'd, we read them. And then we put them in a fire to send the aroma up to heaven. And as we read these, we poured red wine into broken wine glasses and let the wine pour down onto through the table onto the floor. And, it wasn't some simple thing, or people saying, I stubbed my toe, and, yeah, it was really painful. Damn you, God. It was this person I love died. I don't see my kids. I was honest and I was robbed. It's like, I lost the person that I love, and I'll never have them back. These were incredibly powerful things that people were reading out. And we finished with some readings from the book of Job, and we gave everyone a little gift. I bought like 100 Tamagotchis, if you ever remember Tamagotchis. A little key ring, you make a little creature, and then it demands, you create it, but then it starts to make demands on you, and you have to feed it every day or it dies. And, it's a kind of subtle reflection that maybe this God that we're fighting is God of our creation or not. But it was just like, we always gave a gift, so it was just a gift. But, in one sense you go, what do you mean, when God has sinned against us? God doesn't sin against us. But, the funny thing is people didn't have to kind of like didn't have to make something up. most people resonated with it in some ways. That there's like, this is a time for me to say something in here that I'm carrying, that I'm angry about, that I'm frustrated about, that I want to shout at God. Oh yeah, we did a reading from a beautiful book called Yossel Rackover Talks to God. It's kind of a post-Holocaust Jewish short story about a man who is, fighting with God and wrestling with God. And we just went, when have you felt God has sinned against you? And some people probably didn't believe in God who were there. Some people were very Orthodox Christians and pastors, and the whole works were there. But we all entered into it, and we shouted. When we screamed and we cried and we poured the red wine into the glasses and let the smoke go up to the heavens, and then we left. And it was lightning. On the surface, you go, that's the last thing you could do in a religious service. Oh my goodness, say how much you're pissed off with God. That's the last thing you do in a religious service. But of course, there's something that's exactly the right place to do that. To bring that up, to let it go, because otherwise you push it down and it eats you up. It's like if somebody breaks up with a person and they're going like, oh, that person's terrible, they're awful, look how they treated me. And the person says, don't say that, say nice things about them. Say nice things. You could go, hold on a second. Like, I have to say this stuff because I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm hurt. I already know that I'm partially responsible. I already know that I was an idiot and I did things wrong. Let me get all of this stuff out so that I can come to know what I know. Right? So the problem the person has is they think that what the person's saying is what the person's saying. That's ridiculous. Most of the time what we're saying is not what we're saying. A lot of the time what we're saying is what we're saying to get to what we want to say. Right? Like if the stereotypical kind of, example of the sexist kind of example of the woman who comes home and it's a comedy and she's like really annoyed with the people at work and the husband's like the reasonable person saying, your boss isn't out to get you and your best friend doesn't dislike you and the guy is the voice of reason. But in a sense, it's kind of, you can read it as sex around, like the guy is an idiot, right? The guy thinks that that's what his wife is saying. But his wife could turn around and go, of course I don't think the boss is out to get me. Of course I don't think my friend dislikes me. I'm saying all of this stuff because I'm frustrated. I want to put it out there so that I can come to know what I know. You're a psychotic by thinking that what I'm actually saying is what I'm actually saying. Because that's what psychotics are. Psychotics are people who, one of the things about psychotics is they think that language says what it says. When someone says, have a nice day, they think that they're saying, have a nice day. Saying, have a nice day. Like whenever you say to someone, I want you to stay, or I want you to leave, what they're really saying often is, I want you to fight to stay, right? The language isn't, what's being said is not what's being said. Something else is being said beneath what's being said. And so, you're providing a space in something like Sins of the Father for people just to get their anger and frustration out, and that isn't necessarily what they think. It's what they need to put out there in order to get to a healthier place where they can, say what they think. That's one of my critiques of prayer, in a sense of like, a lot of prayer is that type of superego prayer. God, I pray for the kids in Somalia. I pray for what's going on. Like as if I care, right? Anyway, that's great. So I pray that, and it makes me look really good. I don't care what's going on in Somalia or Iraq. Now, some of us might care, and me giving money or going out there and doing stuff, but like I don't. It's terrible, but I don't. But I want to be the type of person who thinks I care. I like to pretend to myself that I care. So my prayer becomes a way for me to solidify the image I have of myself as a caring person. But actually a more honest prayer might be, God, I don't care about what's going on in Somalia. I don't care about what's going on in Iraq. And what's more than that, I care more about I think's an idiot and never gives me back my lawnmower when I lend him it. That's a bigger deal to me, and I would just wish you would do something about it, like just like burn his house down or something. I don't mean with him in it or anything, he can be out of it at the time, but like just do something. I'm really annoyed with him, right? That would be a more honest prayer, potentially. And the point of a prayer like that is you bring up how you're feeling and then you're confronted with it. And then you can do something about it. You can work it through. But if you keep all of that down, that's why, like in the Bible, you've got prayers like, I pray that my enemies, that their kids will be smashed against rocks. You don't hear that kind of prayer in church, right? But it's like, you can't do that. But actually, I think that's a very honest prayer, if that's where you're at, especially in a time like that, where your enemies were, killing and raping, destroying. And you say so that, is it Bruce Cockburn, the peace activist, Christian peace activist? He wrote a beautiful song called "If I Had a Rocket Launcher." It's a beautiful song, and I think is that right? Or you know what? It was like I think he was in South America, and he saw these helicopters coming in and shooting people, unarmed people, and he was angry. And the whole thing is, if I had a rocket launcher, and the last line is, if I had a rocket launcher, some son of a bitch would die, right? And he's asked, you're a peace activist, why are you saying this? And he's going like, because I'm sitting there watching this, I'm so angry, it's bursting in me, I had to get this out of me. But he says, I'm singing this, and he says, and I'm realizing that the kids in these helicopters, some of them are 16, 17 years old, and they're part of this system, and I'm realizing that I'm part of it, and the policies of my own country and government are part of this. And he says, and I'm tied up in it. He says, I've got to express this anger as part of my working it through, right? And that's why, you've got to give people space sometimes to express their frustrations and their anger, and not then judge them. Oh my goodness, you can't say that. You can't say God sinned against you. You can't do this or that. You can't do that. You go, no, you can. Bring it out. Process it. Bring it to the surface. And another very quick example was a service we did called Queer, where you walked into the bar and there was somebody who was half naked and he's wearing shorts, topless, and he was standing there like this, and this woman was writing queer, faggot, sodomite, on his body in kind of black charcoal, and there were rocks strewn around. And that night we said, listen, there's some of you want us to say that being gay is somehow wrong, right? And tonight we're not going to say that. And some of you want us to say that it's totally fine. And you know what? We're not going to say it. We're not going to say any of that. Tonight we're just going to listen to people's stories. We're going to listen to stories, the stories of people in the room. We're going to listen to some music. And there was a night where somebody did this great reading about telling his parents that he was straight. So it was kind of like a play. And because you have to, if you're gay, you have to kind of come out and tell your parents you're gay. So he did this thing about what would it be like if you had to kind of tell people you were straight. And there were different stories. And that night we wrapped these rocks in cotton wool and in bubble wrap. And we kind of said, listen, whatever you believe at the moment, we don't want our beliefs to hurt. So we wrap them up to show they're precious, but also so that if we chuck them, we don't kill someone, right? And we created that suspended space. And we said, listen, there's plenty of places for us to argue about this stuff, plenty of places, but just for 1 hour, let's hear the stories. And the guy who was in the center of the room, I remember him, he's a guy called Brett. And he was 21 years old at the time, YWAM guy from America. And, his views would have probably been pretty conservative. And we were planning, and I remember him saying, listen, can I be the person, sorry to say this, but could I be the person who stands in the middle of the room, I just feel like that would be really powerful for me. And we're like, yeah, fine. And so he stood there as this young, YWAM, North American Christian guy, getting all of this written on him. And it was, personally very, very transformative for him in his theology and his personal life. As a straight guy as well, but where you encountered the other, where instead of, this other, for a lot of people in the room, they heard these stories, and they saw this body etched with these horrible words, dehumanized. And of course, there was a Christ-like element to it as he stood there, this dehumanizing of someone. And, you didn't directly address it, but indirectly somehow that symbolism, for some people had power. One more, and then, let's see how I'm doing. I don't even know how to read that. So, 4:35. We're doing good. Yeah. One more. We did one on fundamentalism, and this was at a festival where there were some protesters outside who were handing out flyers and signposts and all of that. And as people were going in, and they were handing out a flyer called "Sinners in the God in the Hands of Angry Sinners," which is a really good name for a flyer. I met the guy who made the flyer. He came to a talk of mine. He said, I'm writing a flyer against you. And I was like, all right, very good. And we were chatting about it. And we were talking about it. And he said, I wasn't sure what to call it. And he gave me a couple of names. And then he said, I was thinking of instead of sinners in the hands of an angry God, I was thinking of God in the hands of an angry sinner. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. That is so good. You have to write that. That's the one, And it was really interesting. It was a very bizarre conversation. He even said something nice about me in the flyer, which he doesn't usually do, I got to say. So that was kind of good. But we're handing these out. Now, of course, it was a setup. It was all our people who were the protesters, right? But people didn't know that, so we're walking through. In fact, even the festival didn't know it, so the festival almost chucked them out. We're going, yeah, get rid of them. We threw them out. But it's because you're going into this thing about fundamentalism, so what better way than to experience some sort of aggression and see what it brings out in you? So people start to argue with those people, and there's this kind of argument, and it shows how your defenses come up. And then you go into a room, invites us to start to sing. God is the way, the truth, and the life, and let us celebrate. And this, in this massive auditorium, on the screens come up the words, and it's a kind of a triumphalist type of song. And now most people know that Icon's not really a singing type of place, but some people sing with it. It's a Christian festival. But then the words dissolve, and underneath them come other words that say, I am the truth. Follow me, be my friend, don't be my enemy, for I will crush my enemies beneath my feet. I am the truth. And things like this, and suddenly the song starts to become a little bit icky. You're singing about the truth and all of this, and you're kind of all of this kind of stuff about, crushing enemies beneath feet and all of this kind of violent language. And then the worship leader gives his testimony of how he became an atheist. He used to be a Christian worship leader, and then how, as he stopped believing, what that was like in his community, and how he felt ostracized and all of that. And there was a number of things, but people would stand on a soapbox in this room, and one woman got up and she stood there and she didn't say anything. It's like she was going to say something, and then she didn't speak. And after a few minutes, she stepped down, and it said, "A woman shall remain silent." In big letters behind, And then somebody else got up, this other woman, and she gave this beautiful sermon called The Singing Ministry of Christ. It was a beautiful sermon, just stunning, such good wordplay and very poetic. And as she finishes, you hear the same sermon booming through the speakers. And it's the voice of a guy called Ian Paisley, who is massive fundamentalist in Europe, well known, kind of like a Pat Robinson figure or something like that. But he is the paradigm fundamentalist. And you realize that this is his sermon, this beautiful sermon, the singing ministry of Christ, were his words. And kind of this went on. At one stage, we had beliefs written on rice paper, and we gave them to each other. These are our beliefs broken for you, and consumed each other's beliefs. Go what does all this mean? I have no idea. I don't know, but it means something. I felt it's like watching a Donnie Darko or something. You go what's it mean? I don't really know, but I felt very emotional at the end. And what does it mean to pour red wine into broken wine glasses? I don't know, but it was beautiful, right? One time we did communion. Oh, this was a really tough one. We kind of very subtly did a kind of faith as we started off very subtly about kind of how faith can give you hope and give you meaning and that kind of stuff. But we gradually built it up through music and various things that it became faith as just a way of feeling good. And then we brought out communion, which was champagne and chocolate cake, and somebody got up and stuffed the chocolate cake in their face and then drank down the champagne, and then we started bringing it around to get people to eat. Come eat, this is the body and blood of Christ. Drink, forcing this chocolate cake and this champagne on people. It was very, very awkward, But again, trying to bring to the surface in different ways and symbols and something that's maybe going on in our community that we're not saying. So maybe our faith is sometimes a way for us just to feel good and feel better, and sometimes it's just champagne and chocolate cake, right? Now, how does all this relate to your situations? I have no idea. But I would say this, the kind of communities that I'm envisaging, it's like, it's trying to do this with the prayers and the sermons and the songs. Well, a friend of mine who's a great musician, he's the Reverend Vince Anderson. He has a residency in Brooklyn, in New York. Every Monday night, starts at 11:30 at night, goes to 2 o'clock in the morning, jam-packed, 200 people. He does what's called dirty gospel, and it is amazing. I mean, half the time he ends up basically naked, swinging from some sort of like the things, and he's going around touching people and, preaching, and you don't know whether he's just mocking or whether it's real or not, but he is a reverend, and he's the reverend of Williamsburg, and he's also a pastor of Revolution. It's now called, what's it? The Tabernacle, the Barstool Tabernacle. So it's called Bar Tab for short. Yeah, Barstool Tabernacle. Yeah, which is this little tiny church of like 15 people in this little bar in Brooklyn. But his residency is jammed with dirty gospel that's grounded and gritty, where everyone is welcome. But he says to me, every worship team should have one breakup song, and not with Jesus, just a breakup song, right? Just something that connects. And that's kind of it. Is what does this look like? Well, if you're in a worship team, put in one breakup song or some music that connects, because that's what a singer-songwriter does. They sing about some suffering or brokenness in a way that allows you to connect with it, so that you can look at that in yourself and do the work. Do a prayer which is about, which is honest about the doubts and the unknowing, or God, are you there? God, I don't care if you're there, or whatever, We always sing, God, all I want is you, for example. That's not true. None of us think that. We all want to, our Starbucks after everything, it's like, but, it's a fiction that we play, so let's be honest. And let's put that, what does it look like to do a prayer that would do that, or a sermon that would reflect some of the doubts and the unknowing and the joys and the brokenness and all of that stuff of the community, and let that feedback. And find a way of doing it that doesn't freak people out. So you say, listen, look at the Psalms. The Psalms are full of songs of joy and suffering and unknowing and anger and beauty. And so we want to reflect that a little, just as an experiment tonight in the songs. Or, I was at a bar last night and I heard this singer, and he just really made me look at some difficult things in my life. And so invited him along just to sing a song for us tonight. It's part of the music, right? Or, I was at this comedy show, and this comedian was brilliant, got us to look at some embarrassing things about life and being human, and we got laughing about it. And so I thought it'd be great for her to do the sermon tonight, because comedians are brilliant at indirect communication. They'll get us to laugh. I saw Louis C.K. a few weeks ago. It was brilliant. And he just did half an hour on death. He just talked for half an hour about dying, being middle-aged and facing death, right? I go like, that's all. And he wasn't even telling jokes. He was just talking about it. But it was hilarious. But it was also like, oh my, he was an existential comedian. The existentialists in America today are in the comedy world, They're the ones who can get us to look at the darkest of stuff, but laugh and celebrate and find joy in the midst of it. Just like a good singer-songwriter. So the techniques are comedy, storytelling, music, parables. Parables are a great way of telling the truth without getting killed, right? They're a way of kind of speaking around, and parables are easy to write, really. I mean, people don't know how easy they are, because you don't need great story development or anything like that. There's like interest, no big character development, just ways to twist and turn. We need to learn how to do this. Like, if you hear me, I tell stories. You've heard me tell stories today. You've heard me tell a couple of jokes, that kind of thing. I'm not a storyteller. I don't do jokes. I learn because it works. Because otherwise I'll be speaking to two people and a dog, right? And these are the things we have to learn. Don't think that it's something that you either are born with or not. No one's born with the ability to play the guitar. You think a great guitarist, they put you off because they're so good, and I'd never be as good as that. Yeah, you can if you put the work in. To be a good preacher, there's only one place today people go to hear someone speak for an hour. Well, church and comedians. You know, we need to learn from the comedians. And I'd go to Louis C.K. He filled an auditorium that U2 are playing in LA. He filled it, one person. And he filled it talking about death and is how, you know, he's middle-aged and grumpy and doesn't really like things. And he fills this auditorium of people who want to listen to him just talk for an hour and a half. We need to learn from these people. They're the moral voice. They're, in a sense, maybe the voice of Christ in the world today, and we want to be able to do something of that in our sermons. So, you know, I wish I had some big bells and whistles finish with like pyrotechnics and like the secret and the answer, but it's simple. It's you do the work yourself. Look at your own lack and your own anxieties. Do the work. Be honest about what you're struggling with. Realize that that's probably similar to what your community is struggling with. Find ways of being sympathetic to that, and find stories and parables and music that can help bring those things to the surface. Don't worry about what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years' time, because you probably don't know. Just commit yourself to trying to, in beautiful ways, bring that to the surface and see transformation. And also have a back door. Learn to do something else in case they get rid of you. And in case you just can't do it and you get bored. And there you go. And this is where I will finish, and then we'll have a few questions. There's a documentary called Kamari. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's beautiful. It's brilliant. It's about a guy who pretends to be a guru, because he's like, all this religion stuff, it's all rubbish, you know. These leaders who think they have some secret to life, you know, they're just like us. They're just struggling, right? So he becomes a guru to show up how ridiculous the whole thing is. He grows a big beard, so he's Indian American, and he grows a big beard, looks like some sort of Hindu kind of prophet. Wears this robe, carries a ridiculous, massive staff, has these rituals which like are kind of like this, like, you know, air guitar rituals, and he starts to talk like his grandmother, puts on this really ridiculous voice. Arizona, and he starts a religion, and about 15 or so people follow him, and you know, these people are kind of funny. It's like they're all broken people. They're all like one guy who's going around taking free samples everywhere he goes. He spends his days just going for free samples in the shopping mall, you know, and people like that. And then so it's funny until about 20 minutes in, and then you kind of get to know these people better, and you realize that, okay, these are not just jokey. These aren't jokes. These people aren't jokes. That guy, you know, he goes around taking free samples in shopping centers because he's got no friends. He doesn't know anybody. It's his only human contact. And, you know, and then I go like, and that's kind of what I do when I go to coffee shops. I go to coffee shops to work. Why? Because I want the little bit of human interaction, maybe, you know, whenever I'm buying my cup of coffee, that if I don't feel so alone, and maybe have a nice conversation with someone. Going like, yeah, that's just me. And you kind of come to know and like these people, and so does he. So there's the day of the great reveal where he's going to tell them all. He's just set them up, and he totally bottles it. He can't do it. He's embarrassed. He doesn't do it. But at the end, he goes away for a while, and then he comes back, and he does tell them. He shaves off his beard. He comes in his regular clothes. And he stands in front of them with his regular voice, and he says, I'm sorry, this was a documentary. I just wanted to show how easy it would be to be a guru and start a religion and have a laugh at it. But he says, you know, I fooled you, and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. And it's kind of beautiful what happened. You know, some people were angry, of course, but most of the people embraced him, because most of the people were positively transformed by the experience. The community that he created was helpful to them. There was a woman who was obviously very insecure, and she gradually got more security when she was in that thing. And he basically said, you know, I didn't do this, you did this together. And what you see in this documentary is this thing where the very moment that he reveals he's not a guru, I think is the only moment where he is a guru. That is the move of the guru. The move of the priest is to say, I'm no priest. It's a priesthood of all believers. It's a priesthood of all believers. You think I'm special and magical, just like you go to a therapist and you think they're magical, they're going to be able to fix you, and eventually you realize they can't. They just helped you reflect on your own life, and you did the hard work. You were the one who did it. They were a midwife for you. And then you break up with them and you learn how to live, right? That at first people come to a religious service, a gathering like this, because they go, you've got the answers. Maybe people come to this because they go, they've got the answers. And then slowly through the various rituals of the community, you gradually disillusion them of that. And then finally it's the big reveal. And there is no guru, there is no wholeness, completeness here. We're in this together. We're doing this together. It's the priesthood of all believers. I'm no guru. And it's the death of the leader. And something new arises as a result of that. That, I think, is the role of the religious leader in some ways, is to death. To allow people to project onto them, to play out all that stuff, to gradually disillusion, and to gradually let the people do the work themselves, to find music and prayers and sermons that help to bring the repressed to the surface. And what's after that? I don't know. Freud once said, I'm here to make misery into everyday unhappiness. Like, that's what exactly it is. That's not because happiness is contingent. There's happy things happen and unhappy things happen, all of that. So that's, in the midst of that, there's misery. Misery is where we're destroyed by things. What does a community look like that does have sadness in it, and joy, and good times and bad times, but we're not oppressed by the state of misery? That we're not obsessed with kind of life after death, because the main question and the main pursuit is how do we live before death? In community, we learn how to do that. They've actually turned off my mic. Please stop. So,
thank you for the comic relief stuff.
Yeah.
I fixed the mic that lost the battery. Oh no, it says it's almost full still.
It's on.
All right, is that unmuted?
Yeah. You mean muted?
This is actually intermission. He's going to do another hour. So
Yes.
everybody.
So questions now is if you've got questions, this is your last chance to ask questions. Come to this mic. We'll do 10-15 minutes of questions and then we'll relax. And tonight, if you come, we can also talk informally if you have other questions you want to ask. So, and if you don't want to come up to the mic, just shout your question and I'll repeat it. You know, just in case that's off-putting. Oh, come on up. There you go.
Well, I was thinking earlier, and I was talking with my friend, when I was younger, I was raised, like you say, with kids. You know, I was told I was beautiful, I was wonderful, I was worthy, and I grew up with this very loud, opinionated voice, and people let me know pretty quick. I think I had a friend in high school who I thought a lot of, and she gave me a T-shirt one time that said, "Help, I'm talking and I can't shut up." And everybody thought it was really cute, but I went home and I actually cried because it hurt, because I knew that was my ghost. That was where I was at. There were times when I knew what I was saying was making me not a friend or making me ostracized. So there's this ego that we have when we realize I'm a child of God and I am worthy of divine love, but then there's this humility we know we have to face, where we know we're also broken and not. And how do we live in this body, in this place, knowing that there's a place for us, there's a job we're sent here to do, but we don't feel fully capable of doing that job? Where do we balance that ego and that humility so that we can be what we're meant to be? Yeah.
I mean, my analogy partly is AA. AA meetings are kind of like, for me, the innovation of church in the 20th century in the West. And it's not church, that's the thing, but it kind of is, as far as I can see. But it's a place of grace. So you come, you talk about who you are, what you are, and because it's alcoholics, it's like you say you're an alcoholic in a community that accepts you for that, and it doesn't ask you to change. Because the thing about grace is it doesn't ask you to change. If I demand you to change and ask you to change, what happens is often, a number of things, like if you've got a church with a mission statement that's kind of a discipline thing, and you're doing something wrong, and don't do that, you don't do that, shouldn't do that, The demand not to do something just pushes the stuff further down, and it comes out in other ways. Either it doesn't work and you continue to do it, or you push it down and it comes out elsewhere. The way to change is you say to someone, you don't have to change. You're great just the way you are. I mean, something you'll never read in the Bible is everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial, right? That's crazy. The Bible definitely says something about lots of things aren't permissible, right? Now, the fact is, I said that once in a non-evangelical group, and nobody picked up on it because they said, we're not evangelicals, we don't read the Bible, right? So it is actually in there. I don't know if you evangelicals should know. It says, Paul says, everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial. And that sounds like totally mental. It's like, what? But that's how grace works. The point is you go like, you know what? Not everything's great, but the no generates the desire to transgress the no. You say no to somebody, and it generates the desire to do the opposite, or it represses. If you just accept someone for who they are, they're able to bring things up, get rid of their guilt, and be able to transform. So a psychoanalytic example was somebody who was sleeping around a lot, and they felt really guilty about it. They thought, what would my parents think? What would my community think? But they're doing it. But at least they feel guilty. At least they feel guilty. That means they don't do it as much as they would normally because they've got the guilt. But then during the analysis, the analyst helps work through the guilt and gets rid of it. Don't worry about the guilt. So the guilt disappears, and you're going, oh my goodness, you get rid of the guilt. Now they're just going to like sleep around every night of the week, right? But when they got rid of the guilt, so did the desire to sleep around. So what you thought was the thing that was preventing you from doing it more, the guilt, was actually the thing that was fueling it. You get rid of the thing you think is the obstacle, and you get rid of what the obstacle is holding back. Person just kind of... So in that example, a community of grace where you're able to just talk about who you are, your weaknesses, your strengths, just be honest. And then in AA, once you've done that, there's like 12 steps. There's like different techniques that might help. But that happens afterwards. The techniques happen once you've just had that space of grace. So I think for me, the church should emulate that. What would it look like? I mean, it sounds crazy, but if it was a community of grace that accepted people for who they were and saying, yeah, we're all in the same boat. And what if, crazy as it sounds, that's where real transformation happens, in that place where it's like, don't worry, you don't have to go crazy and try and change. Just tell us what you're struggling with. We're going to bear witness to it, and we're going to share where we're at as well. That sounds silly, but I think that's transformative. That's what it looks like. I have a question. Brilliant. Come on up.
Probably don't need the mic, but in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye says, somewhere in the good book, it talks about a chicken, and he's all about tradition and everything else. Do we have it so out of focus that we're trying to focus on traditions and not realizing that the book is more like a history of how God is talking through the people, how to just deal with life to know Him? What you're saying a lot of?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, one of the parables that I love is that parable of the old priest who goes to pray every night in temple, and that the cat is always running around bothering him, so he ties the cat to a tree during prayers. Eventually the old guy dies, and the disciples continue to tie the cat to a tree during prayers. Eventually the cat dies, and they go out and buy a new cat at the market to tie to this tree during prayers. 7 generations of cat go by, and they have to plant a new tree. And then finally the scholars come along, and they write learned treatises about the theological significance of tying cats to trees during prayer. I think that's what happens with traditions. Is often traditions are techniques, technologies, things that are designed to do something to help in our ongoing transformation. But then the technologies become reified. We hold on to them. They lose their spirit. And we remain faithful to the form, but not faithful to what gave birth to them. And what we need to do is then find ways to rediscover the subversive core in those traditions, like we did Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is incredibly powerful, putting ash on your head. But for many of us, it's just become a thing you do once a year. But that's a crazy powerful ritual of death and dust and all of that. So the long and short is just I'm reflecting what you're saying. I think you're right. Is that that we sometimes reify our traditions. And what we need to do sometimes is rediscover that these traditions were subversive in their day, and now we've domesticated them, and to be true to them, we either have to reinvent them, or to create new ones, or just somehow return to the spirit of the old ones. I don't know. I, by the way, don't want to sound like I'm the expert at this point. Every time someone asks a question, I feel like, I need to answer it. I don't need to answer it, I shouldn't. Maybe some questions just need to be left sitting in the air. Does anybody have a, go for it, another one?
First off, are you reading my diary? Because I put a tiny little lock on there.
Well, yes.
I feel like you're telling my story.
It was easy to break.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah, I like the pink. It was a nice color. Yeah.
You talk about shift when you experience. I did the record breaking. I went through that, and then experienced that place where you shift. Mm-hmm. And now, oftentimes when I encounter people, like we've talked about Rob Bell, or you talked about Rob Bell. I don't like saying anything about that, because then people, almost like I don't like telling people that I'm a follower of Jesus, because then I can't meet them honestly. Mm-hmm. In the same way, people in church, I don't like to say Rob Bell's name at all. Mm-hmm. I think you're getting on that list too. Yeah. That I don't know if is that good? That's good.
It happens eventually. You can't. Eventually people pin you down.
Yeah, but. What's it been like for you, or how have you learned to navigate talking with someone who doesn't indirectly speak to you, who directly speaks to you and directly says, you're ostracized because of you enjoy someone else's teaching, or because you enjoy thinking at things differently than I am? And what's that been like for you?
Yeah. I mean, if you're, in a place where you're able to do this, the big thing is you don't have to mention the other people's. I mean, I read Rob Bell, or I read this, or I read that. The big thing is, tell me about yourself. I mean, that's the big move. It's almost to be enigmatic. For me, the role of the leaders is to be enigmatic. Traditionally, you have a pastor whose job is to tell you what they think, right? You're in no two minds about what the pastor thinks about a given verse, And the problem with that is, if you agree with the pastor, you generally stay, and if you disagree, eventually you leave, right? And so the church becomes a place of sameness. Everybody thinks the same. But for me, the role of the pastor is partly to be an enigmatic figure that you can't quite ever pin down. You don't quite know what they think about anything. Even though you've heard them speak every week and they've got books out, you're still kind of wondering, I don't know. Probably a lot of you are going, I actually don't really know what Peter believes. I've listened to him for like 4 hours. I've read his books, and I still don't really know what he actually believes about certain things. But that enigmatic thing is useful, because why would it be important to find out? Sometimes people want to know what I believe because either they like me, and so they want to know that they agree with me and I agree with them, and it makes them feel good about themselves, or because they don't like me, and if they can disagree with me, it makes them feel good about themselves. But either of those are of no use. They're not useful, so it doesn't do anything. It's not of any value. And if I believe one thing and you believe another, and at the end of the conversation, you've convinced me and I've convinced you, we changed places, but nothing's really changed. I believe something different, but I'm probably holding on to it in the same way, so it's having the same functions. Different set of beliefs, but functioning in the same way. What I'm more interested about is how your beliefs function. So for me, the minister, the religious leader, remains relatively enigmatic, opens multiple interpretations, and it's the annoying thing of when they ask, who do you read? You're going like, why do you ask, and kind of like in a very subtle way, try to keep pushing back, and also trying to find the question beneath the question. If someone's asking you, who do you read? Are they asking you it because they want to ostracize you? They don't really like you, and they want you to say Rob Bell so they can be annoyed with you? Or do they like you and they want to be in the same team as you? That's just as bad, right? Because you're someone who they look up to, and so it helps them feel better knowing that they're in your team. That's of no value whatsoever. Some people like what I have to say because if they like me, and some people don't like because they don't like me. But I've got to try and avoid that, because if someone follows me just on my work because they like me, why do you like my stuff? Oh, I don't know, I just like it. That's a terrible reason. It's like, well, think for yourself. I'd rather you disagree with me, but So all of that to say, you get it's not whenever it's your equals or your family or something, it's more difficult. But if you're able to have a little bit more distance, you kind of do that, and Jesus did it all the time. I hate saying, "Oh, like let's be like Jesus," because that's everyone says that, you know. But I think Jesus did do this. When people asked him questions, he often found that what was beneath the question and addressed that. And he often didn't give people direct answers. I mean, it's funny that Christianity has become quite a system of beliefs, because if you're trying to find out what Jesus believed, oh my goodness, it's crazy. It's different things to different people. They seem to contradict. Sometimes they're bizarre things that, and often he's throwing things back. So I try and do as much as possible. The problem is it doesn't, like, Brian McLaren, I think, was very good at this. But even Brian McLaren eventually just, you get put into the goodies or the baddies, right? And you can't, it's very hard to stay enigmatic at a public level. And it's very hard for a minister to stay enigmatic. But I think that's important. And same way as a therapist, people go to therapy and they look at the therapist's office to try to find out what they're interested in, because they might want to emulate the therapist, read the books the therapist does, so that the therapist will like them. All of that. The therapist remains enigmatic. You don't know. The point is the therapist becomes enigmatic, so you project onto them all of your stuff. And you live out old relationships in the present thing. You're enigmatic enough. People will, if I'm enigmatic enough, people will transfer onto me their relationships and their issues. And then I'm able to work with that and go, what's going on here? You seem angry, you seem frustrated, what's happening? Or so the long and short is, yes, be enigmatic. And also then you'll be able to create a church of difference. Where one person's going, he's a crypto-atheist, the other, he's a crypto-theist. You're like, brilliant. You've got both of them here, and they're chatting to each other. Fantastic. I don't know if I answered your question at all there, but hey. Maybe one more. Here we go. It's the slow walk. Creates more tension. Creates more, what's he going to say? Oh, you are taking it slow. I like it. All right.
What is Ireland doing for the homeless? Is it comparable to our government? And what are you doing for the homeless?
Oh, wow. Very good.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know much about what Ireland's doing for the homeless. I actually used to work for a homeless organisation called Simon Community. This is about years ago, years and years ago. We don't have, like, America's very interesting, because I'm sure some place in America, like San Francisco, seems to have a very big homeless population, and then some places I think are better. So I don't know. I have no idea actually what Northern Ireland would compare to, what state of America or whatever. But yeah, but I'm not in that at all. If I was to get involved in something in America, and I'm a lazy person, so I'm a lazy and bad person, so I probably won't. But it's actually prison stuff. That's the one that kind of interests me. Because here's the thing, by the way, you can't be involved in everything. That's the thing, right? So the whole thing, to be ethical, means to be unethical, in a sense of, if you are a doctor and you go into a room of 100 people who are sick, you have to block out 99 of them so as you can help one of them. If you feel all of the suffering, you'll be no good to anyone. So whenever you hear me say things like, I don't care about kids in Iraq, I'm not saying to you have to care for everything, but you should have, I'm guessing you work with the homeless maybe. I don't know, maybe you don't. But something that you throw yourself into, but that also means that you don't do all the other things. And so, I don't want to put a big burden on everybody that I have to care about everything. In some senses, sadly, you can't. But what we need to do is throw ourselves into something. But do you want to come back on me on something?
Well, I've learned in Los Angeles they have a big population, and Pastor Barnett has been highly awarded for his hotel for the homeless, the Dream Center, and they help a lot of them get back on their feet and be productive citizens and have jobs.
Yeah, did he? Did somebody tell me the other night there's a documentary about him? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. Maybe it was you told me. Somebody told me, so I'll have to check it out. I hadn't heard of him before last night, but. Yeah.
And there's some people here in DeLand that want to do the same thing, but the city is against it because they don't want to attract a bunch of homeless people to DeLand from other areas.
Yeah. And there's a couple of people I've met here who work with homeless organizations, so I know there's good work being done here with that, so thank you. I'm glad you put me on the spot. Yeah, I'm not doing anything about the homeless. I'm a bad person, okay. Yeah.
I'm gonna ask a few closing questions, and so I want to simultaneously get some direct answers, but let you remain enigmatic.
Okay.
And so here are our closing three. The most important music on your playlist. Communities that you think reflect that. Maybe if people are looking for some practical, like I'm thinking of like Barry's community, are there some things that you would point to and say, again, not that they're perfect, not that it's a new Eden, but hey, they're putting into practice some of the things we're talking about. And then maybe a movie or two that you think are really, really moving that apart from any sort of religious affiliation, like watching this movie could create some positive transformation.
Oh, those are very good. Mark Kozelek. Is it Kozelek? Is this you pronounce his name? He's got a brilliant album that's beautiful and very moving. And like I use this quote all the time. But I'm going to use it again. I don't care. I had a patron, a very good friend. He helped me come to America. And he said to me, Pete, sometimes you just got to repeat the same old thing because you're talking to different people and not always trying to do something new. So I'm going to repeat an old Kierkegaard quote that I use all the time. And it's Kierkegaard says, what is a poet? A poet is someone who screams and cries in agony, but whose lips are so formed that when they cry out, beautiful music is formed. And so when we say to the poet, sing to us again, we say, may new disasters befall you. Right? That's what a good singer-songwriter does in many ways. They just cry out in agony, but their lips are so formed that when they cry out, beautiful music is formed. And we say to our musicians, suffer for us again. And they do. And we touch on our own suffering as a result. So Mark Kozelek is somebody who I'm really listening to. The other one's communities. Yes, I think obviously Collective is a community that I think is attempting to do that. Also, yeah, I know. As you're wearing your "We Are Collective" T-shirt with "We Are Collective" like signs everywhere in a collective building. Yeah, can you name like just one community? Yeah, remembering that we haven't given you your check yet. Yeah. Okay. Collective. Collective's great. Collective is doing this Sunday service. A very good friend of mine, Barry Taylor in LA, has got a community that I think is really living this out. And there are places that are dotted around. I'll be honest with you, there's fewer. I do this for a living. I go around a lot of places, and there's fewer than I wish. I wish there were more. There's lots of places that I think are doing this partially and doing it a little bit. I'm looking for people who want to go all the way with this stuff, right? I'm always looking for that. And the thing is, the good news is, right, if you don't do it, it will still get done. Bullshit. If you don't do it, it won't get done, okay? This needs, if you like what's being said, you have got to do it. I mean, really, there's no way around it. So I hope you don't agree with what I'm saying, and you can go away having been challenged and having a few thoughts and had a day where you can get some nice coffee. But if you think there's something in this, you have to do it. You have to do it in Deland. You have to help Collective do it. You help your communities do it. It doesn't get done. And you know what? If enough of us do it, it's going to work. No, it's not. I don't know if it's going to work. It probably won't. And you make an omelette, you crack a lot of eggs, and a few of us are going to lose our jobs as a result. It's difficult. I'm lucky. I seem to be able to make a living just about doing it. Right? Not all of you will be able to do that. So don't do it. No, you do it. You do it. You just count the cost and you do it. You just do it and you enjoy it. And so. There are people doing it, and Barry's one, Ben, and people here, and there's a few places. There's a place called Shelter 50 in Rapid City, and there's individuals. There are people around there, but this is small. If you wanna build an empire, promise people certainty and satisfaction. It's 10 times harder to get people to question their beliefs than to solidify them. It's 10 times harder to get people to question their political, religious, cultural ideology than it is to build it up, to give them more. So you got to be 10 times better. So be 10 times better. Be a better communicator. Be a better musician. Be better at what you do. Let's not be amateurish about this. Let's let's get good at helping people. And by the way, those places that are big, that promise certainty and satisfaction, they've got huge back doors. So there's a lot of people coming out of there who have been damaged. Many of us are those people. And we've got to help them kind of like whenever those things don't quite work. And for the ones who it does work for, great, brilliant. But the ones that don't, they need other places. And some of the communities will be small and some of them will be big. It doesn't have to be small. Good musicians sometimes get well known. Bob Dylan can fill an auditorium, but most of the time good musicians do small things, small numbers of people. But, there will be the odd mega church that I think lives this kind of stuff out. And then there'll be lots of communities of 50, 100, 150, 200 people who do it. But like, there's fewer places. There's not very many places I can mention, but hopefully in 5 years' time there'll be more. And finally, kind of a movie that I think is, you put me on the spot there. Because I'm always using movies, but most of my movie references are films that are like at least 15, 20 years old. Miami Vice. Yeah, okay, I'll think about that. And but yeah, that's my spiel. You got to do it. Put this in action, and it's rewarding. It's transformative, and hey, beats doing other stuff. So cool. Alrighty. Thank you.
All right. So as we've been doing, we'll all go hang out back there. If there's anybody who would like to purchase some of the books, again, Pete will hang around and sign them. Sort of chat here informally, and then the deal is it's 5:15, so we do have an extended dinner time. You've got a couple hours. You're in no rush. Feel free to walk anywhere downtown to land. Google stuff close. You can drive. You have enough time. There's some good stuff within driving distance either way. So go do that. Take a good deep breath from the belly, clear your mind, and then come back. We'll have beer and wine for sale here tonight for real cheap. We're just trying to kind of cover our costs, and then Mike the Prophet is going to play. We're going to hang out and continue this conversation and maybe talk about what Pete just challenged us to do, which is how do we do this. Thanks again.